Imagine you're a seasoned detective.
Right.
You walk into a crime scene, bracing yourself for this chaotic, bloody aftermath of a serial killer you've literally been hunting for years.
Yeah, you'd know his signature inside and out at that point.
Exactly. But instead, you find a pristine, vacant lot. Just a perfectly posed body and 0 drops of blood anywhere.
Not at all.
Nothing. The killer hasn't just changed his forensic footprint, It looks like he's changed his entire species.
Wow, that is a massive shift.
It is. And we are diving into some incredibly gripping source material today. It's excerpts from Foul Blood.
Such an intense read.
Oh, absolutely. Our mission for this deep dive is to explore what happens when a gritty, hard-boiled police procedural just collides head-on with supernatural horror.
Right, blending those two genres.
Yeah. And I want you to keep one core question in the back of your mind as we go.
Yeah.
How do you solve a crime when the psychological profile of a human serial killer starts morphing into the mythology of a literal monster?
It's a great question.
Okay, let's unpack this. We are jumping into a profoundly dark world told through 2 opposing lenses. On one side, we have David Reynolds, a terrifyingly calculated serial killer.
And on the other, you have Karl Vincent. He's the stressed-out detective who put him away and is now basically forced to hunt him all over again.
Yeah, and the author drops you immediately into this state of cognitive dissonance.
Totally. You are forced to experience the impossible right alongside Detective Vincent. I mean, we're dealing with Reynolds, who is slated for lethal injection in Florida for murdering a security guard.
But he's actually housed in a Massachusetts prison at the moment.
Right, exactly. And his escape from that facility is it's a masterclass in biohacking and sheer psychological audacity.
The escape plan is wild. I mean, Reynolds is staring down the barrel of execution with absolutely nothing to lose. So he orchestrates this bizarre, high-stakes medical escape.
He really leverages everything he can.
He does. He bribes a prison janitor with, like, a pack of smokes, and he wires $1,000 to an infirmary worker named Nick Butler.
Right. And in exchange, they smuggle him a lethal anesthetic called vecuronium bromide.
Which he just mixes in his cell, right?
Yeah.
Based on some handwritten instructions. He takes it and effectively just dies.
Well, he appears to, yeah.
Yeah, and then he wakes up later on a cold autopsy table.
Which is insane because taking a paralytic like that without life support is it's generally a death sentence.
Because it stops your breathing, right?
Exactly. Vecuronium bromide is a heavy muscle relaxant used in general anesthesia. It paralyzes the skeletal muscles, and crucially, that includes the diaphragm. So you stop breathing.
So how does he actually survive it? I mean, if it paralyzes the diaphragm, he shouldn't be waking up on a slab. He should just be dead.
It comes down to a terrifyingly precise calibration of the drug's half-life. Reynolds relies on the infirmary worker to provide a very specific microdose.
Oh, so not the full lethal amount.
Right. The goal isn't to stop his heart. It's to slow his respiration to an undetectable level. It has to be shallow enough to fool the initial guards and the prison doctor checking his pulse, but just enough to keep his brain oxygenated.
That is such a gamble.
It's a massive gamble. He likely had to hyperventilate heavily before taking it just to saturate his blood with oxygen.
Wow.
Yeah, taking that drug to fake your death is, it's like rebooting a computer by yanking the main power cord straight out of the wall.
That's a great analogy.
It's a massive, violent shock to the system. You are banking entirely on the fact that your hardware is resilient enough to turn back on before the oxygen runs out.
And his hardware barely makes it. He wakes up on the autopsy table, just completely paralyzed by this immense, concrete-like drug grogginess.
He can't even move at first.
Right. He has to wait for the mortician to turn his back, fight through the paralysis, steal a medical smock, and find some janitor coveralls.
He even mops up a spilled Coke in the hallway just to blend in.
Yeah. And then he just walks right out the front doors of the hospital. It is this brilliant, methodical sequence. But here's where I get hung up.
Okay, what's that?
Well, Reynolds is clearly a calculated genius to pull this off, right? So why is his behavior described as suddenly erratic, almost feral and animalistic the second he gets into the Boston air?
Yeah. To understand that shift, you have to look at the biological catalyst, and that actually happened weeks prior in his cell.
Oh, right. With the rat.
Yes. So Reynolds is a sadist. He tortures small animals, It's a coping mechanism and a mirror to the horrific abuse he suffered as a child from his father.
Who was a police officer, ironically.
Exactly. So 2 weeks before the escape, Reynolds catches what he describes as a vampire rat in his cell. He notes its unusually long fangs.
Ugh.
Yeah, he tortures it, the rat bites him, and in this moment of escalating depravity, Reynolds drinks its blood.
And he doesn't just drink it. The text describes the warm blood giving him this electric charge, right? Like a massive physical surge of power.
Right, that physical reaction is key. Later, after escaping the hospital, he hides out in an abandoned security shack near Boston Harbor and is bitten by an unusually large, strangely intelligent bat.
Okay, so a rat and a bat.
Yep. What's fascinating here is how the source material deliberately blurs the diagnostic lines for you.
How so?
Well, is Reynolds contracting a fast-acting, mutated strain of rabies from these bites? Or is the supernatural element real and he is literally transforming into a vampire?
It really keeps you guessing.
It does. The text presents his symptoms as grounded in physical pathology, but heavily hinting at the occult. I mean, he gets a euphoric high from drinking blood, experiences extreme temperature drops, violent shivering.
And strangely, when he tries to drink his own blood from a splinter wound, it does nothing for him.
Exactly. He specifically requires the blood of others to stave off the sickness.
Which brings us to the guy tasked with tracking down this evolving nightmare detective, Karl Vincent. Seriously, Karl is a devout Catholic, a deeply stressed cop with a wife and 4 kids. And he is currently facing the terrifying reality that the man who previously threatened his family is back on the streets.
And Reynolds made it very personal before.
Very personal. During previous interrogations, Reynolds used to taunt Karl. He dropped details about Karl's daughter's birthday, proving he knew exactly where the detective lived.
So Karl carries this crushing psychological burden. He knows the depths of Reynolds' depravity.
It has to be paralyzing.
It is. The mere thought of this predator roaming the same city as his children just terrifies him. And that fear is immediately weaponized when Karl is called to a new, deeply unsettling crime scene.
Right. This is where the killer's M.O., his modus operandi, diverges so wildly, it feels like a completely different person.
It's a total departure.
Yeah. They find a victim, a 23-year-old Harvard student named Constance Haight. Her body is dumped in a vacant dirt lot behind a rundown club called First Impressions.
But the scene is wrong.
Eerily clean. The body is laid out neatly, arms crossed over her chest like she's resting in a coffin. There's not a single drop of blood on the ground.
None.
And she has rope burns indicating she was tied up after she died. Oh, and her head is missing.
The forensic pathology of that scene is what really shatters Karl's understanding of the case.
Oh, yeah.
When a body is completely drained of blood, a medical examiner can tell almost immediately.
Through lividity, right?
Exactly, livor mortis. Normally, when the heart stops, blood pools in the lowest parts of the body due to gravity, and that creates a purplish discoloration.
But if there's no blood?
Right. If the vascular system is empty, there is no lividity. The tissue becomes this unnatural bone-white pallor. The veins feel spongy and collapsed.
Right.
And to achieve that without a massive, chaotic blood pool at the scene means she was drained elsewhere with surgical precision.
But why would a killer completely abandon the signature that gave them a psychological thrill in the first place?
Yeah.
I mean, before his arrest, Reynolds used to torture victims.
Like electrocuting that man with jumper cables.
Yes. And he would clean his victims with blue-green soap, use chemical solvents, and bind them with duct tape before death.
Which is very specific.
Yeah, duct tape is about absolute control and silence. So why switch to rope? Why tie a body up posthumously?
Because the motivation for the violence has fundamentally changed. Duct tape, like you said, is a tool of restraint for a living victim. Post-mortem binding with rope is ritualistic.
It's for presentation.
Exactly. The neat placement of the body, the missing head, the lack of blood, none of it fits the forensic profile of David Reynolds, the sadist.
It's completely off.
It points to something predatory in a different way, something Karl's logical mind desperately wants to reject. He's looking at the work of a creature feeding, not a man torturing.
And the environment surrounding the crime scene only adds to the chaos. The club, First Impressions, is this rundown dive bar with a caving-in roof.
It's a very specific setting.
Oh, yeah. Karl and his brand-new, overly eager junior partner, Lyle Chauncey, they have to navigate this entirely unfamiliar world.
They're totally out of their element.
Completely. They interrogate this colorful cast of suspects. There's the owner, Leo Kowalski, who happens to be a Polish mob hitman known as Leo the Freezer.
Naturally.
Right. The manager is a gruff cigar chomper named Linda Lane. And the featured performer is Betty Ford, a towering, muscular drag queen who physically unnerves the conservative Karl by leaning over the bar and taunting him.
Throwing Karl, who is a traditional Catholic, and his captain, a Southern Baptist, into this specific subculture is a deliberate narrative choice by the author.
It really isolates them.
It does. They are trying to apply their rigid black and white worldview to a setting they don't understand, which frankly blinds them to the actual clues.
Right. And while they are distracted by the mobsters and the drag performers, a second body drops in the exact same spot behind the club.
Same exact location.
Yeah. This time, it's Paul's sweetheart, Sacitella. He's a mafia informant who is set to testify against Peter the Muffin Man Moretti, the boss of a rival crime family that Leo Kowalski used to work for.
But there's a huge clue left behind.
Yes. Crucially, the police find Reynolds' signature brand of cigarettes Edgefields next to the body.
And that cigarette is the glaring anomaly. If we connect this to the bigger picture and look at the mechanics of a frame job, the author is stacking red herrings to manipulate you and the detectives.
Just piling them on.
Oh, absolutely. You have a dead mafia informant found behind a club owned by a mob hitman who is running an illegal after-hours gambling operation.
It looks so obvious.
Right. So the local police department immediately jumps to the most logical conclusion. They say, it's a mob hit.
But Karl's gut rejects it completely. He deduces that dumping a rival mobster in your own backyard is incredibly sloppy for a professional hitman like Leo.
It makes no sense.
Exactly. If the Polish mob did it, Sacitella would be hanging in a meat freezer somewhere, not just left out in the open behind a dumpster.
That is classic confirmation bias at play within the police force. The department wants this to be a mob hit because it fits neatly into an existing organizational chart.
It's an easy close.
Exactly. Or they want the Edgefield cigarettes to prove it's David Reynolds so they can close their fugitive manhunt. But Karl realizes the narrative is being artificially constructed.
Someone is playing them.
Yes, someone is trying to merge the chaotic, unexplainable elements of a serial killer with the structured, understandable mechanics of a mob hit just to hide their true tracks.
And while Karl and Chauncey are pulling at these bizarre threads, the story explodes into this massive, highly visible action sequence. It's a daytime bank heist at the First National Bank.
A huge escalation.
Huge! Reynolds is reunited with his old partner in crime, Timmy Danza, and a crew of thugs.
The visual details of this heist are striking. The crew is wearing comic book villain masks, the Joker, Jigsaw, the Green Goblin, the Red Skull.
Which is such a vivid image.
It really is. And think about the psychology of that choice. Reynolds is a man whose physical body and internal reality are mutating.
Right, he's changing.
Yeah. By donning a supervillain mask, he is projecting this new, elevated sense of self. He no longer sees himself as a mere mortal criminal. He views himself as an untouchable apex predator.
And it also hides his face.
Exactly. It's highly practical if his face is beginning to show physical signs of a disease or transformation.
Right, so it's a tense standoff in the pouring rain. A massive nor'easter has turned the daytime sky pitch black. Reynolds has hostages inside.
And Chauncey really proves himself here.
He does. This is the moment Karl's young partner really steps up. While Karl is out front on the megaphone, deliberately stalling Reynolds, Chauncey secures the building's blueprints.
So smart.
Yeah. He crawls through the narrow ventilation system, drops into the bank behind the robbers, uses a handkerchief soaked in chloroform to incapacitate Timmy Danza, and systematically evacuates the hostages out the back doors.
It's a great sequence.
It culminates in this chaotic shootout where Karl takes a bullet to the arm from Reynolds, who manages to slip away into the heavy fog.
The heist is an incredible set piece, but the true narrative weight lands during the aftermath. Chauncey arrests Timmy Danza and gets him into the interrogation room.
And here's where it gets really interesting. Karl presses Danza for details. Why this specific crew? Why this bank?
Right, he wants to know the logic.
Karl points out how incredibly lucky the gang was that a severe storm rolled in, giving them visual cover to escape the police perimeter.
But Danza corrects him.
Yeah, it wasn't luck at all. Reynolds demanded they execute the heist on a cloudy, torrential day. Why? Danza reveals that Reynolds told him he simply couldn't stand the sun anymore.
And that single line of dialogue acts as the key that unlocks the entire mystery for Karl and for you, the reader.
It all clicks.
It does. All the disparate, confusing forensic clues suddenly snap into alignment. The body is completely drained of blood. The shift from duct tape to postmortem rope presentation.
The bat bite.
Yes. And now, a violent physical aversion to sunlight. Karl is forced to accept an impossible reality. Reynolds hasn't just tweaked his psychological signature. His psychosis has convinced him he is a vampire.
It's a brilliant realization. But wait, is it just psychosis? Because you mentioned earlier that his physical symptoms were real. Could he just be suffering from a psychological delusion?
Well, you're touching on a very real, documented psychological condition known as clinical lycanthropy, or more specifically in this case, Renfield syndrome.
Oh, I've heard of that. Clinical vampirism, right?
Exactly. It's an actual psychiatric disorder where an individual feels an uncontrollable physical compulsion to consume blood. It's often triggered by a severe childhood trauma.
Which we know Reynolds had. He suffered horrific abuse from his father.
Right. The genius of the source material is that it gives you enough grounded, real-world psychology to explain Reynolds' behavior medically.
But then there's the other stuff.
Yeah, simultaneously, it layers in enough impossible details, like the completely drained bodies, to make you wonder if the supernatural mythology is actually true.
So Karl is sitting in a sterile fluorescent interrogation room, realizing he might literally be hunting Dracula.
It's wild to think about.
It is. But right as Karl has this epiphany, the narrative shifts entirely away from the police procedural. We dive into a subplot that violently collides with the main story.
Right. The focus moves back to the First Impressions Club. It serves as a dark mirror to Reynolds' calculated evil by exploring the tragic consequences of human ignorance and panic.
Yeah. So we are introduced to Jaden Roberts. He's an old high school friend of Detective Chauncey, visiting Boston for a funeral.
And he ends up at the club.
Right. Jaden heads over to First Impressions, essentially looking to gawk at how the other half lives. He drinks heavily and becomes infatuated with the featured entertainer, Olivia Decoit.
But there's a massive disconnect happening here.
A huge one. Jaden, completely oblivious to his surroundings, assumes the club is just a regular strip club. Olivia, who is a transgender woman and has undergone years of hormone therapy and surgery, assumes Jaden knows exactly where he is and who she is.
It is a collision course built entirely on mutual misunderstanding, and it's severely compounded by alcohol and deeply ingrained societal prejudices.
Yeah. Olivia takes the heavily intoxicated Jaden back to a cheap motel. During intimate foreplay, the physical illusion breaks for Jaden. He realizes Olivia is a transgender woman.
And his reaction is just.
It's immediate, devastating, and entirely rooted in toxic masculinity. He flies into a blind panic. He screams at her, claiming he was tricked.
Even though she assumed he knew.
Exactly. He punches her, breaking her jaw, and in a fit of transphobic rage and fear, he beats her to death on the bed. Terrified of the consequences, he throws her body out the fifth-floor window into the alley below.
It is a profoundly ugly, sobering sequence. The author uses this moment to yank the horror out of the supernatural realm and slam it back into grim, everyday reality.
It feels very real.
It does. Jaden is not a criminal mastermind. He's a fitness trainer from New York. But his ingrained bigotry, combined with a momentary panic over his own threatened masculinity, turns him into a brutal murderer in a matter of seconds.
So Jaden sprints out of the motel, hyperventilating, completely consumed by panic. But as he's running blindly through the dark alley, a voice calls out from the shadows, taunting him.
Out of nowhere.
Yeah. The stranger mocks Jaden for brutally beating a woman who never actually posed a threat to him. Jaden pulls a small throwaway gun from his ankle holster, his hands shaking uncontrollably.
And then the stranger steps into the light.
The stranger steps out under the street lamp. It's David Reynolds.
This alleyway confrontation is really the thematic climax of the entire text. This raises an important question, right?
Yeah.
You have two killers face to face.
Yeah, Reynolds steps right up to Jaden and literally dares him to pull the trigger. He presses his forehead right against the barrel of the gun.
And what does Jaden do?
He completely freezes. I mean, he just beat a woman to death with his bare hands in a fit of rage. But standing in front of a true, calculated monster, he is paralyzed.
He can't do it.
His hands shake, and he lowers the weapon. He is entirely incapable of killing in cold blood.
This sequence forces you to evaluate a deeply uncomfortable question. What is the true anatomy of a monster?
It's such a stark contrast.
It is. The author juxtaposes two radically different types of violence. You have Jaden, whose crime is a horrific, tragic failing of human empathy born of ignorance, societal bigotry, and momentary panic.
And then you have David Reynolds.
Exactly. His violence is predatory, methodical, and entirely devoid of human emotion. He tortures and kills for the sheer psychological and physical high.
Right.
By having Reynolds the ultimate apex predator judge and dismiss dismiss Jaden for his cowardice, the text forces us to examine the entire spectrum of human depravity.
It's an incredibly heavy, thought-provoking dynamic.
Yeah.
And it's what elevates this story above a standard thriller.
Absolutely.
It takes us from a clinical, highly calculated prison escape involving paralyzing drugs and bribes into the terrifying realization that a supernatural predator is loose in the city.
While also doing all the mob stuff.
Right. It does all of this while using the classic tropes of a mafia detective, story hitmen, informants, stakeouts, as this brilliant, distracting smokescreen.
The narrative subverts your expectations at every single turn. You think you are analyzing the forensic footprint of a mob war, and suddenly you realize you are dealing with a creature of the night who is merely using the mob as a convenient, logical dumping ground to hide his feeding habits.
It's a masterful manipulation of genre conventions.
Truly masterful.
So what does this all mean for you? When you look at the mechanics of a story like Foul Blood, it asks us to look closely at the dark corners of psychology.
We see how systemic, prolonged abuse like the beatings Reynolds endured from his father can fundamentally rewire a human brain.
It plants the seeds of a monster, or perhaps triggers a condition like Renfield syndrome.
Exactly. But we also see how everyday prejudice and blind panic, like Jaden's rage, can result in an equally devastating loss of life.
It really makes you question where the boundary lies between a deeply flawed human being and an entity of pure evil.
It does. And I want to leave you with one final, lingering thought to mull over regarding the nature of that evil.
What's that?
Well, throughout the source material, David Reynolds is empowered by the fear of others. Yes, the physical consumption of blood gives him a biological high. But knowing he terrifies Detective Karl Vincent gives him a profound, sustaining psychological high.
Oh, like with the cat.
Yes. While Karl was distracted at the hospital, Reynolds actually went to Karl's suburban home, decapitated the family cat, Stoodles, and left the body right on the front lawn.
Which serves zero biological purpose.
None. It was purely to send a message. Reynolds feeds on terror just as much as he feeds on plasma. So consider this. If a monster's true power is derived from the sheer paralyzing terror they inspire in us, is our fear the very thing that makes them invincible?
Wow, what a question. If you stop fearing the monster in the dark, does it suddenly lose its fangs?
Something to think about.
Definitely. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into the complex, shadowy world of Foul Blood. Keep unpacking the stories around you. Keep looking closely at the forensic details of the narratives you consume. And remember, sometimes the monster isn't hiding in a Gothic castle.
Sometimes he's just waking up on an autopsy table,
Putting on janitor coveralls and walking right out the front door. Until next time.